So this morning, we're going to continue in our Jesus Is series. And I'm going to break a lot of rules today. I was going to say unspoken rules, but they're not unspoken. They're all written in all the books that you get when they teach you how to preach and how not to preach. And I'm going to preach how you're not supposed to preach today. All right? So that's just a little caveat there because that's what's going to happen. So today, we're going to start here in John 18, and the title of our sermon today is Jesus is Not Taking the Bait. Jesus is not taking the bait. And I tried, because Father's Day is coming up, Jesus is not taking the bait trail, and you'll understand that in a moment, but I just said I'll leave it at this and not try to make a dad joke in the sermon title. But Jesus is not taking the bait. We're going to start in chapter 18 of John. Everybody here is tired for some reason. I can just feel it. All right, it's hot in here. I get it. Let's just see if we can engage with God's word really quick for a moment, all right, and not be asleep already, all right? Don't make me do that thing where I make you all stand up and do the hokey pokey, all right? It's embarrassing for all of us, all right? So, John 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went away with his disciples. Now, this is just a reminder. He's coming out of the Lord's Supper. Judas has left. He's given some instructions as they're walking through Jerusalem, it would seem. And then they're going to make their way into a space that Jesus has gone to many times before with his disciples. And like I said, I'm going to break all of the rules. We're going to read this today, and then we're not really going to stay in it. We're going to look at all of the surrounding stuff that's all about Jesus in these moments before the cross. But we need to set ourselves in this space to begin with. So, his disciples across the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas, who was betraying him, also knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having obtained the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, came out into the open and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." And he said to them, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with him. And then when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. He then asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are seeking me, let these men go on their way." This took place so that the word which he spoke would be fulfilled. "Of those whom you have given me, I lost not one." Then Simon Peter, since he had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, am I not to drink it?" So the Roman cohort, the commander, and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him, brought him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was in their best interest for one man to die on behalf of the people. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, and he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave woman who was the doorkeeper said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" And he said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves. And Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching, and Jesus answered him. And I just want you to see here, Jesus, just see how simple his answers are. Just keep that in mind throughout this whole time. "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple area where all the Jews congregate, and I said nothing in secret. Why are you asking me? Ask those who have heard what I spoke to them. Look, these people know what I said." But when he said this, one of the officers who was standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" And I'm like, "Is that the way you treat God?" But whatever. Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong, but if rightly, why do you strike me?" So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Now Simon Peter was still standing and warming himself, so they said to him, "You're not one of the disciples as well, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, who was related to the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Didn't I see you in the garden cut off my cousin's ear?" And then Peter denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Amen? I just want to ask you this question. Who's the betrayer? Like if I say, who's the betrayer in the Bible? Judas, right? Like, we'd look at this story, who's the one who betrays Jesus, right? It's Judas. But I was thinking about it, and I was like, actually, I don't think that's true. Like, it's not just Judas. Like, I think we like to kind of maybe dumb down Peter's betrayal and call it denial so we can separate the two. You know, like, no, it's just a denial. No, it's a betrayal. And that's where God started me today, and that's why I'm saying, like, I'm not going into all the nitty-gritty today. I just felt like God was saying, we need to talk about betrayal. We need to talk about betrayal, the way Jesus deals with the way that we do, and sometimes how we think everything's betrayal and it isn't. But the reality is that betrayal is intrinsic. It's intrinsic in human relationships. We see it all the time. It's at the root of the fall, by the way. We all experience it. We all do it. Like we've all eaten that forbidden fruit. And so I started to think about, okay, what are we talking about when we say betrayal? Because some people would have different, so this is what I just found a definition I think is great. Betrayal is the violation of trust. So the first thing is it's a violation of trust, or it's a violation of confidence, or it's the violation of a presumptive contract between individuals, groups, or organizations, and it causes moral and psychological conflict. When I talk about it that way, don't you realize, oh yeah, I actually experience betrayal kind of on a daily basis. I might even be involved in it on a bit of a daily basis. Because at the foundation is a breach of trust, okay? It involves the breaking of some sort of relationship expectation or, the loyalty we expect or the safety we expect. And all of this is just, good old Google put this up for me, so I'm just using it, right? But there's forms of betrayal, right? What are some of it's bigger and I want to make sure that we don't see it flippantly today. Because there are different ways of being betrayed, and I'm not speaking to all of it. I actually feel like God is trying to speak to our day-to-day right now, okay? But there's common forms. Lying. Lying is betrayal. And yes, infidelity is betrayal, but lying is betrayal. Revealing secrets, that's betrayal. Gossiping about somebody, that's betrayal. Supporting a rival group. And this is a daily thing. And sometimes, and I'll call these things like, we have these things, what we call them? Microaggressions. I'm going to call them micro-betrayals. All right? We experience micro-betrayals every day. All right? And sometimes they're kind of funny. I know you want, Pastor Josh is really casual today. No. I got to tell you something super exciting. Okay? Just about a month ago, in the quiet of my office, some lady in Manitoba over Zoom said I was now a Canadian citizen. You see this? I have this. Look at that. Canadian. Now, my mom visited just the other week, and I have this piece of paper that says I'm Canadian. And my mom walked in, and I said, Mom, I'm not American anymore. I'm Canadian. Look, I'm Canadian. And the look on her face was like, oh, the betrayal. There is a level of betrayal and all these different things, and sometimes we don't recognize what they are. And because we don't recognize that's what it is, I think we assign it in different spaces, and then we don't respond to it the way that God would call us to respond to it. But the reality is that being lied to, having your trust broken, that's betrayal. And Jesus gives us these examples in this story. Now, I want to talk about the fact that this has this impact on us, that if we don't address it, it sits deep, the psychological impact that it has on us. With some shock, loss, grief, all of these things come. Damaged self-esteem was one that I read. I thought, that's true. And anger. But if we don't realize where that stuff comes from, if we don't acknowledge what it was, right, then we don't understand why we're acting the way that we're acting. And I'm not talking about trauma the level of trauma the level of betrayal that has a traumatic effect. There are some of those deep abusive kinds of things, and I'm not saying this is that cure-all for that. I'm saying that this is something we need to understand, and understand that this betrayal happens. It happens in our workplaces. It happens in our homes, at our schools, sports teams, whatever it may be. And even politically, right? They might call it treason. And I am treasonous. right, to my mother. That's not true, okay? I actually one of those rare people who gets to be more than just one thing, all right? And so I am still proud to be an American. But I am grateful to God for my Canadian family and the fact that he's allowed me to live here as long as he has, which, by the way, is almost as long, almost, next year, as I ever lived in the United States. But the reason that I want this, the reason I felt like God was talking to me about this is because he was saying we need to anticipate that betrayal is coming. Right? Jesus knew it was coming. He knew specifically what was coming. But betrayal, brothers and sisters, should not surprise us. It is intrinsic in the human experience. We should be prepared. It's going to happen. And let us learn from those in this passage. And so let's start with Jesus. And I say this passage, but like I said, I'm breaking every rule. I'm not even going verse by verse. I'm jumping from John to Luke to Mark to Matthew. And I'm not even going to explain to you why. Except to tell you that Jesus is teaching us some things in the midst of this. Because a lot of times in these passages we've commonly heard, and we know this betrayal story, most of us have heard it before. It's the unpacking of some things that maybe we haven't seen before, and that's what God wants us to do today. So what do we say? When I say that Jesus is not taking the bait, what I mean is that Jesus is not taking this betrayal, right, and responding from his flesh. He's just not doing it. He's not doing it. And so when I talk about Jesus and what we can learn from him, I want you to understand, he has this moment, these moments in this story, and he refuses to let those betrayal and that betrayal keep him from going to God. He refuses to keep that trust, that betrayal, to keep him from going to God. You see it in 18:1. When Jesus spoke these words, he went away with his disciples across the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden, which he entered with his disciples. And we know from the other Gospels, Luke 22:39, and he came out and went, as was his habit, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. He did not allow, he knew, listen, and I think sometimes we maybe miss that they're probably in this kind of walled-off space, right, that's owned by somebody and given them permission in this space, and so, yes, it would be important for kind of Judas to show him where he is, but Jesus knows that this is happening. He knows what the betrayal is, but he does not change course. He doesn't change direction. He doesn't go, oh, you know what, today I'm not going to go there because look what might happen. But he insisted that in the midst of betrayal, what he had to do was go to God with it. And see, we often, what we do is we even put the blame more on God, oftentimes, when we're betrayed, than on this fallen world. God, how could you let this happen to me? How could you let this person blah, 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 blah? And in that moment, we get this mindset, and we bypass going to God in the midst of our betrayal. And we respond to betrayal from ourselves, from our emotion. But Jesus, knowing he was going to be crucified, knowing he was going to be betrayed, in the midst of it actually made his priority going to God. So he refuses to let any betrayal keep him from going to God. Secondly, he refuses to deny his pain. And this is important. Betrayal hurts. To pretend like it doesn't, to act like it doesn't. And there's just a deep honesty in the way Jesus responds to everything. It's something we need to learn from. In Mark 14:33 through 36, and he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be very distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch. You see, you need to see that Jesus is also giving us that permission, that example to process these betrayals and the pain. It says he went a little beyond them and fell to the ground and began praying that if it were possible, the hour might pass him by. And he was saying, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. He acknowledges that it hurts. So he refuses, and this is something we need to do. That Christianese stuff like I'm too blessed to be stressed when in fact we are stressed, isn't helpful for you. All right? The stuffing of things is not helpful for you. Let me tell you this very clearly. I think that Jesus, and I'm thanking the Holy Spirit because I didn't even see this till just now, but I think Jesus actually teaches us something here because he articulates his pain out loud. He doesn't allow himself to get the solution himself either. See, I think we get into these spaces of betrayal and even silently try to process it with God, and he does it out loud. Yes, I know God knows our thoughts, but Jesus, right here in verse 36, verbally says, I'm upset. He lets it outside of himself. That's an acknowledgement that the solution, the answer, is not in here. It's up there. So he refuses to deny that it's painful. Why would you? Sometimes I think we look tough walking with a limp. You know? No, man, I'm good. I had to just on Friday. I just had it on Friday. But I had to play a basketball game, and I made a beautiful pump fake. I mean, it was beautiful. Amazing. Put the ball on the floor, had the guy beat, and he didn't like it, so he essentially tackled me. And it hurt a lot. I have evidence all over here and in here. And I'm on the ground, and I'm like, my two boys are here. This is men's league. You're getting up, and you're going to keep going. And I did. And I looked tough and foolish at the same time. And I think we need to start understanding, acknowledging pain is not weakness. It's the beginning of healing and restoration. So he refuses to deny. And then he refuses to abandon God's will. You see, this is so important. You know how many times something goes wrong in our lives and we just quit? We just give up? Jesus, Luke 22:42 saying, Father, if you are willing to remove this cup from me, I don't want to do it. It's painful, yet not my will, but yours be done. Right? So there you go. So he refuses to abandon God's will. Right? It's also he refuses to excuse his friends. This is an important piece of this that I just noticed. Jesus is not really super critical of all the people coming at him. He kind of calling out his friends like, hey, you're supposed to walk here with this, right? So Job, in Job 16, you remember Job? And Job, if it has experienced something, and Job is a classic example of somebody who at some point in the process starts to actually think he's betrayed by God, right? And what he really needs is some people to help him stay in that space. But in Job 16:1, it says, then Job responded, I have heard many things like these. Miserable comforters are you all. He's speaking to his friends, the people who are supposed to help him get through this hurt, right? Is there no end to windy words? Or what provokes you that you answer? I too could speak like you if only I were in your place. I could compose words against you and shake my head at you. Or I could strengthen you with my mouth, and the condolence of my lips could lessen your pain. And so he's speaking to his friends and saying, you're actually making this worse. You really should be making it better. And you have that choice. In Mark 14:37-42, and I'm reading a little bit more of these passages because I want you to hear it. And he came and found them sleeping. That's Jesus, as he asked them to pray so that they wouldn't fall into temptation. And he asks after he's told them, I'm hurting. I'm going to be betrayed. I am being betrayed. I'm in the process of it. And he says to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying so that you will not come to temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to say in reply to him. And he came the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? That's enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. Behold, the one who is betraying me is near. It's unbelievable. He's asking his friends. his community to rally around him in the midst of it. And he has an expectation that they would do it. In John 18, it says, "Then Simon Peter, since he had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. And the slave name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, 'Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, am I not to drink it?'" He's still honest, truthful, and expectant. You are my friends. You are my community. You are supposed to support me in the midst of this, and you're supposed to help me not abandon God's will. And I just want you to, this is what God was saying to me when I was reading it this time. He just said that Jesus, he does this alone by the grace of God, but he's not supposed to. See, I want to challenge us today. I want to challenge all of us, all right? All of us in our different spaces. And I want us to start opening our eyes and seeing those who are going through hard things. And I want us to be the kind of people that encourage them through those hard things, keep them on pace with the will of God, and be the kind of people we're supposed to be as a community that God has called us to be. So Jesus refuses to excuse his friends from what they're supposed to do. And sometimes that's really hard for us to call out our friends. We'll just deal with it on our own. But you weren't designed to, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. And I have one friend in particular, who always calls me out when I don't stand with her when I'm supposed to, and I hate it when she does it, and I'm upset about it, and then I acknowledge, that's right, I should have been there. I'm sorry. I'll do better. Jesus also refuses, in the midst of his betrayal, to create collateral damage. What's collateral damage in the midst of betrayal? Well, I had a bad day at work. I had betrayal at work. I came home. And now my wife's collateral damage. All of my frustrations that are really about everyone else, she's getting it. Now, instead of just going to talk to this one person, I'm burning down the whole thing. I'm assigning the same issue to everybody, the same thing to everybody. One person said it, you all said it. John 18:8. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he, so if you are seeking me, let these men go on their way." He said, hey, listen, your friends are supposed to stand with you when you are betrayed, but you are not supposed to allow your friends to suffer your consequences. So Jesus says, hey, listen, you're looking for me. I am the one. Let them go. I am not making them go down with me. I'm not dragging people with me just so I have company in my misery. Let them be. Luke 22:50-51. And one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus responded and said, "Stop, no more of this. We're not doing this. We're not going scorched earth. We're not doing this." And what does he do? He picks up that guy's ear and he heals him. That guy, by the way, now we know his name is Malchus. Romans 12. What does it tell us? 14-21. Because what I want to say when I say that Jesus refuses to create collateral damage is that even in the midst of betrayal, he loves his neighbors and he loves his enemies. And Romans 12:14 says, "Bless those who persecute you, bless and do." When you are being betrayed, because that's what this is, Romans 12 is talking to a group of people of saying, when you are being betrayed, bless. Bless those who... This is what I'm talking about. when I say we experience this daily and in and out and all the time, and it's cyclical, how are we actually responding to this? Look at what Jesus was doing, and this is the challenge. When I feel that sense of betrayal, when I feel like someone has lied, when I feel that breach of trust, where do I go? Most of us go to our feelings. Jesus went to God. Who do I look for to support me? Most people look to the internet or whatever, or to drugs or to alcohol. Jesus says, look to your community. Reach out to them. Acknowledge what's real. Don't deny it. The pain is there. And then Jesus says, and don't make this everyone else's issue. Why is your family getting all this collateral damage? Because you're unwilling to do all of these other steps. I'm just telling you right now. Because you didn't go to God with it. You didn't assign it where it was. You didn't acknowledge that it was pain. You stuffed it away, and now it spills out to the people you love the most. And they don't deserve that. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. Never repay evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all people. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all people. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Verse 21 says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. How do you respond to betrayal? Two wrongs make a right. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But in the midst of his betrayal, in the midst of everything that's going on, and I believe it's because he's gone to God, because he refuses to abandon God's will, because he does acknowledge what he's actually going through, he stands up for the minority. He stands up for the ignorant. There's some ignorant people here to arrest him. And he stands up for the wounded. See, our stuff we're going through doesn't excuse us from loving the people God has called us to love and to care for those who don't care for us. Like I said before, he never stops loving his enemy, and he never stops loving his neighbor. What a challenge. Because oftentimes, in the midst of betrayal, the only one that matters is me. And that's why we have to keep the balance. If Jesus had stopped at, my friends should have been nice to me, and they weren't, he would have lived there. I'm not telling you to do that. I am telling you to be good friends, and I'm telling you that you can hold your friends accountable when they abandon you, and they shouldn't, because that's how we grow. But not only does he refuse collateral damage, he refuses to bypass the truth. So at the same time, you have to understand he's going through all of this stuff, but he doesn't shy away from the truth. He just doesn't clam up, be quiet, and just take it from that space. In Luke 22:52-53 it says, and Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and the elders who had come against him, have you come out with swords and clubs as you would against a man inciting a revolt? This is a little extra. We'll get to some of this in a moment. While I was with you daily in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this hour and the power of darkness are yours. He points to this injustice. I want to understand, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but this whole thing's a sham. The whole thing. It's actually illegal what they're doing. They're not supposed to do this at night. So he's not doing all the other stuff with them, but he's just like, this is a sham. Right? And this is not what it's supposed to be. And sometimes in the midst of these things, it's just easier to concede. Just compromise. Under the weight of others' expectations, right? I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't really want to be in this place of conflict. I don't like it. I'd rather eat, whatever than deal with this anymore. And we become peacemongerers. Do you know what a peacemongerer is? It sounds good for a minute, but it's not. It's just somebody who will do anything to keep the peace. It's not a peacemaker. See, a peacemaker speaks the truth and will stay in places of conflict as long as it needs to be stayed in order for that truth to be acknowledged, recognized, and for things to change. A peacemonger, on the other hand, will just be like, you're right, I suck. And Jesus doesn't ever once bend to the weight of their betrayal. Not once. He also refuses to argue. He refuses to argue in vain arguments. The whole thing, like I said, it's a sham. It's not supposed to happen at night. It's even the way they're doing it is all backwards and illegal. They called Jesus to a hearing understand Annas. Now Annas was the previous high priest, but Caiaphas is the current high priest. Okay? So they go with a Roman cohort, so they go with Roman soldiers, they go with the Jewish guard, they go with all these people, and they bring Jesus to an illegal night hearing, okay, where they now ask him to testify, which is all wrong. They are supposed to call it during the day. They are supposed to call it under Caiaphas, not Annas, and they are supposed to call their witnesses and inquire of the witnesses, not of Jesus. The whole thing, listen to me, is a sham. The whole thing is supreme gaslighting. And they do all of it in order to wear him down. Because you'll see he doesn't go to Caiaphas until the morning. And that's why the roosters crowed the third time. Now all of a sudden it's legal going to because the Jewish people would have seen Annas as the real high priest. Because it's the Romans who changed the high priests. But Annas, from Jewish law, the high priest was high priest for life. So essentially they took Jesus to the higher court illegally to try to frame him for a legal proceeding that's going to happen in the morning. Now, Jesus has every reason now to sit here and tell them all the stuff that's going wrong, but he just simply does not get into all of that. The whole thing is wrong. The basis for it's wrong. The motives are wrong. The outcome is predetermined. And Jesus doesn't waste his breath. So you see in Luke 22, 67 to 71, if you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, listen, if I tell you, you're not going to believe. If I ask a question, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. I'm not here to argue whether or not I am or not. I'm just going to tell you this is what it is, and I'm going to leave it at that. And they said, so are you the Son of God? And he said to them, you say it correctly that I am. Knowing farewell that that's going, he doesn't stop and go, well, remember how I told you the bread of life and manna, and he, go through the whole thing again. He just simply, listen, you say I correctly that I am. And they said, what further need do we have of testimony? You see, they don't even need the other witnesses. We heard it ourselves from his own mouth. They are required to have witnesses. It's crazy when you see it. John 18, 19 to 20. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple area. See, this is why I say Jesus refuses to argue. And I would say he refuses to argue with words. Like his testimony, his life is his argument. It's so important that we see that what's the point in this defense? You didn't believe how I lived. Why are you going to believe what I say? He says, I did this day in and day out. I am who I am. I've always been. Where all the Jews congregate, and I said nothing in secret. Why are you asking me? And this is where he puts them on the thing. He says, why are you asking me? That's not him saying, hey, this would be a good idea for you. It's him saying, hey, you're not supposed to even be asking me this question. You should have done your research. You should have got witnesses. That's why he says, ask those who have heard what I spoke to them. Look, these people know what I said. I'm not going to get into all this. But when he said this, one of the officers who was standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" And Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" It's really simple. He's not getting into a vain argument. He's not proving himself innocent. He is trusting that he is doing what he is supposed to do. He has lived his life the way that he is supposed to, and he has put his life into God's hands. 1 Peter 2:21. What a challenge this is. "For you, brothers and sisters, have been called for this purpose, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example in betrayal, so that you would follow in his steps. He who committed no sin," in other words, his testimony was above reproach. "Nor was any deceit found in his mouth, and while being abusively insulted, he did not insult in return." And that's what I was trying to show you. They called him everything, right? That's not what he's doing. He did not insult return. While suffering, he did not threaten, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." And he himself brought our sins in his body up on the cross, so that we might die to sin and live for righteousness. By his wounds you were healed. Put all of this before God. Like Hezekiah with the letter that he put on the altar and said, "I can't do this, Lord. I'm not going to get in an argument back and forth with this dude who says, I've killed everybody else, why not you?" Put this stuff before God. Refuse, brothers and sisters, for betrayal of trust to keep you from going to God. Refuse that temptation. Refuse it. Refuse to abandon God's will and his ways for you. Refuse to exit community. Refuse to excuse your community from walking with you. That's what Jesus is showing us. But refuse to be the kind of person that lets everyone else's damage others. Put these things before God. Trust in him. Don't get into these long arguments. Let your life do the talking. And let God do the judging. So that's what we can learn from Jesus. What can we learn from Judas? Well, first of all, Judas wasn't alone in his betrayal. The way John sets it up is very clear. John 18:5-7, they answered him, Jesus, the Nazarene, because they asked him, and Jesus said, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with him. Now, when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Who's they? Who's there? Romans are there, so Gentiles are there, Roman cohorts there, Jewish officials, working class folks, everybody's there. Everybody's there. And when he writes this in here, it's really important because at that moment, you'll see there is an acknowledgement that Jesus is more than just a man. There is this sense of something bigger going on right here. In that moment, all of these people who are standing there, knowing better, become culpable in the betrayal of Jesus Christ. It's important for us to see that everyone in this story, every single one of them, is betraying their Creator. Because it's really easy for us to say, oh, the Jews, crucified Jesus. The Jews did not crucify Jesus. The whole world did it. Now then, it says, he then asked them, saying, "Whom are you seeking?" They said, "Jesus the Nazarene." The fact that they have to say it as many times as they do is like this declaration. We know what we're doing, and we're doing it anyways. In 1812, it says, "So the Roman cohort, the commander, and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him." And I just wanted you to see, I believe that John wrote it this way so that we see the scope of this betrayal. It's not just Judas, or just the Jews. Everyone betrays Jesus. And brothers and sisters, we must acknowledge in this place our own propensity to betray him. You see, the only way we can truly walk through betrayal humbly and appropriately is when we acknowledge that day in and day out, we betray the one who loves us the most. What else do we learn from Judas? Well, in Luke 22:48, there's this specific reality. Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Remember when we talked about what betrayal is, and it involves the breaking of relationship expectation. You see, Jesus is saying to Judas in that moment, yes, everyone's betraying me, but you specifically know me. You're intimate enough to me that you would kiss me on the cheek. You would betray me with a kiss. And the reason that Judas is betraying him, from the most logical thing we can figure out, is because Jesus was not the Messiah that Judas wanted. And so Judas, believe it or not, felt like he was doing the right thing because Jesus betrayed him. Jesus was not who he thought he should be. Now, let me be very clear about this, because many of us in here right now are holding grudges and feeling betrayed by people because they're not who we wanted them to be or expected them to be. It is not betrayal if someone is not who we want them to be. How many times have I listened to husbands and wives speak of these betrayals because their husbands and their wives were not the people that they had hoped they had married, that they expected themselves to marry, and therefore every day I experience these micro betrayals by this fantasy man who doesn't exist. And I build daily resentment against someone that God did not create my husband or my wife to be. And I am unfairly holding you to something that you do not deserve to be held to. I have an expectation. Listen, you want to know what it feels like to be someone who unknowingly betrays people? Become a pastor. Become a pastor of a church with multiple cultures that have multiple expectations of what a pastor is supposed to be, and then almost every single day you will betray somebody who expected you to be something else. Oh, was that too true? It was too true? That is exactly why things fall apart in community, in marriages, in workplaces, and in schools. For these two reasons: one, we are unwilling to see how much of a betrayer we really are in our day-to-day life, both to our Creator and to those around us. And two, because we think everybody should be who we think they should be, and when they're not, we're offended by their lack of being like the person we want them to be. Now, I'm going to go even further, because in all of this is this other space, and I'll call it these unspoken contracts we have in our relationships. Can I make it as simple as I can make it? House is a mess. I come home, house is a mess. All right? I'll make it personal, even though I never do this. And my wife's at work, and I know she likes a clean kitchen, right? I know she likes these things, so I get to work. I do all of these little things. I clean up the kitchen, right? Or I make the kids do it and then pretend like I did it. It doesn't matter. Make the bed, do all these things, all these things that I care nothing about. But I know she does. She comes home and does not acknowledge all the work that I did, does not be nice to me, and I did all of that work with an expectation that I would get something in return. I did not get that, and now you have betrayed my sacrifice. I know we didn't talk about it, but you should know this didn't happen on its own. And day after day, that micro betrayal of my unspoken contracts makes me resent you. How about this? Can we get real for a minute? How many of us are actually doing this? Not just in our day-to-day relationships, but in our relationship with God himself. God, you didn't do what I had hoped you would do. God, you haven't done what I had hoped you had done. God, I'm building up this unspoken resentment in my heart that you're not really for me. Because I think at the heart of all of this is this idea that many of us do feel betrayed by God. And now we are the righteous sojourners who love him anyways, put our heads down and go through the tough stuff. And that is not true. Because somewhere along the line, we didn't learn from Jesus and we stopped going to God first. We didn't refuse to abandon his will. And we've lost our way. And what can we learn from Peter? Well, one of the ways that we can avoid doing these things is discerning one another. See, Peter could not discern Jesus. Like, he could say the words, but he couldn't quite figure out who Jesus was, and he just kept messing this stuff up. Asking, what is God's will for them? Because he denies Jesus when it's all said and done, because I don't think he truly believes and understands who Jesus is. There's this betrayal because as much as he loves Jesus and will follow him and stand with him, he doesn't quite believe because he hasn't quite discerned fully who Jesus is. Can we ask questions about people? How and why are they created? And it's not for you. You see, this is the problem. If I am looking at my husband and I expect and want him to be something that he is not, the deeper issue is that I haven't discerned from God who God called him to be and who God called him to be there for. I have only determined that he's supposed to be for me. Why was my husband created? What is God's will for him? And how do I help him get there? God, you made me marry this man, and he is nothing like the man I thought he was. You betrayed me, Lord. But what if your husband, contrary to popular romantic belief, was not created for you, but rather for God? The second thing we learned from Peter, and we see it in 18:17, because it says that the slave woman who was a doorkeeper said to Peter, "You're not also one of the men." I was already. He says, "I'm not." First of all, he's scared. He wants to get in. Second of all, you see in verse 25, and this is really great. It says, now Simon Peter was still standing warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and he said, "I am not." And then in verse 26, and this is where it really becomes clear, one of the slaves of the high priest, who was related to the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden?" And Peter denied it again. Now, Peter, in this moment, is legitimately scared. How dare he deny Jesus? Well, because, like, just so you understand, like, the whole Jewish thing, like, it's more like the mafia, right? Like, your whole family dies. Your whole family gets excommunicated. Your whole family gets kicked out. Like, he's in this moment right now where if he becomes the guy who cut off Malchus' ear, right, he and his family are in deep doo-doo. Right? They are. It's not good. And so, if there was ever a reason to betray Jesus, if there ever a reason to lie and break that trust, it's right now. But what we learn from Peter is this, brothers and sisters. There is no legitimate excuse for us to betray Jesus. Not, I was tired, not, but by grace. Not any of those things actually excuse our sin. And every time we sin, we break God's trust. So what's our takeaway from all of this? And I'm wrapping right now. The sting, brothers and sisters, of betrayal and the reality of betrayal are still the same. It hurts. Betrayal hurts. But I don't want us to miss the fact that we are still betraying Jesus. And brothers and sisters, that hurts him too. Let me ask you this question. What did Jesus do for Peter that he has not done for you? You see, he's given you everything, every opportunity that he's given anyone else. And so we have to ask ourselves that question. What excuses our betrayal, but not others? We also have to understand that the cost of betrayal is still the same. And this is what is the joy and the grace in all of this, is that when you look at this story and you see it from a larger perspective, you see that Peter is not reconciled with Jesus until after Jesus is resurrected. But what that means for each and every one of us is that if we will acknowledge our propensity to betray him, the risen Christ will reconcile us to him. Jesus, in the midst of our betrayal, will still respond in this same way that he did all those years back. And even in the midst of our greatest betrayal, still will pay the price. We also have to learn that the standard of betrayal is still the same. The example of Jesus in the garden, leading to the cross, in front of this, Mickey Mouse judge and jury, remains the same. First and foremost is this, brothers and sisters, we must today be reconciled to God. And above all else, we must trust him. It's incredibly important that we discern his will for us. And if you haven't asked that question for a while, you should. And it's important that we ask God's will and discern for those around us. We must refuse, as Jesus did, to abandon God's will. Above all other things, we must stand with God, regardless of the cost. And I was going through this, and I'm going to say something today that might be painful. And maybe at the beginning you're going to say, I don't agree with that. But I recognize this to be true, I think, in my own life and in the Bible. You see, whether we like it or not, betrayal is a part of our life. And the reality is that some betrayal, brothers and sisters, is necessary. Some betrayal is necessary to fulfill God's will in both your life and the lives of others. Sometimes your being betrayed is the mirror someone else needs for their salvation. We must refuse to abandon going to God. We must refuse to ignore our painful realities. We must refuse to navigate these things alone in silence. We must refuse to create collateral damage. We must refuse being peacemongerers, the all too present Canadian sorry. And we need to refuse vain arguments and instead be the light and allow our lives to testify to who Jesus is. And as Peter says in 1 Peter, let your good works embarrass the Mickey Mouse judge and jury.